Welcome to today's webinar, Autonomous Vehicle Implementation, Implications for Transportation Planning, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network, supported by the U.S. EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website, smartgrowth.org, that provides current information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The website provides news and information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and resources to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is also the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. We are recording this webinar and will post it on our website early next week under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and subscribe to our e-newsletter to get smart growth news and information and to learn about our upcoming webinars. You can also learn about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is Autonomous Vehicle Implementation, Implications for Transportation Planning. You can also search for event number 9200604. So to get started today, our speaker is Todd Litman. Todd is the founder and executive director of the Victoria Transport Policy Institute, an independent research organization dedicated to developing innovative solutions to transportation problems. His work helps to expand the range of impacts and options considered in transportation decision-making, improve evaluation methods, and make specialized technical concepts accessible to a larger audience. His research is used worldwide in transport planning and policy analysis. Following his presentation, Todd will answer as many questions as time permits. You can submit a question anytime during his presentation by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Todd. Welcome, Todd.
Greetings from Victoria, British Columbia. It's great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about autonomous vehicle implementation predictions, implications for transport planning. This is an important issue for people working in strategic transportation planning. Let's see where we go. There we go. Now, let's put this into perspective. Why is transportation important? It affects our lives in many ways. A typical person spends 60 to 90 minutes a day in traveling outside their home. It represents 15 to 25% of a typical household's budget expenditures. It affects our affordability and economic opportunities. It affects development costs and where development occurs and development affordability. It affects how we interact. Public streets are the main public realm where people interact. It affects economic productivity, public health and safety, and our transportation decisions have all kinds of external impacts, how an individual travel affects their neighbors. Now, for fun, let's go back and see what we predicted our transportation system was going to look like in the past. For example, there were predictions that we were all going to have flying cars, jetpacks, that that we weren't going to have to walk anywhere because we'd all be traveling on segways. The movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was released in 1968, predicted that by 2001, people would be able to travel to the moon on Pan Am spaceships. How much of that has really occurred? In fact, we now have a slower maximum speed than we did 2 decades ago. Between 1976 and 2003, you could travel on commercial supersonic jets, the Concorde jet supersonic service, but that ended. So we're actually a little bit less technological than we were in the past, but there is a new mode of transportation that really is true, unique, or really got established at the beginning of this century. Can you guess what it is? Wheeled luggage. Wheeled luggage is the true new form of transportation for the 21st century. Probably most of us attending this webinar have used wheeled luggage in the past 6 months. And I can pretty much guarantee if you look at photos of your parents' honeymoon or any travel before 1990, you don't see wheeled luggage. Now, so let's think about the future. What about autonomous vehicles? How will they affect individuals and communities? And how should planners respond? How should transportation, parking, and urban planning change to accommodate these vehicles? First of all, let's look at how we think about and measure these. The vehicle engineering associations have established, defined 5 levels of autonomy, ranging from driver assistance and partial automation, which is fairly common with new vehicles now, and conditional automation, which means that under certain environments, such as driving on a highway, a grid-separated highway, you can go into automated mode. And then level 4 and level 5 are the types of automation that are starting to become technically feasible. And that these are the forms of automation that will eliminate the need for a driver altogether. High automation is that a vehicle can drive itself under certain conditions, but it still needs a driver somebody in the driver's seat that can take over. And the level 5 is full automation. The vehicle is capable of performing all driving functions under all conditions, and so the vehicle doesn't even need a steering wheel. So one way to think about this is there are different ways that the autonomous vehicles can be integrated into the market or into your lives. One is people own their own self-driving car. So it's sitting in your driveway and it's yours. The second is shared autonomous vehicles. So you would order a car and it would come to your house and take you someplace. It's an autonomous taxi. And the third is shared autonomous mobility. That is more than one. The autonomous vehicle, the mini micro taxi, picks up more than one passenger. So the vehicle, it's not just the vehicle that's shared, but the trip is shared. Yeah, what will it do for you to have a self-driving car? The user benefits include less stress. So especially in high congested conditions, the passengers can relax and read or get some work done. Compared with a paid taxi driver, it's much cheaper. The passengers can be more productive. So many of the images that we see, the car becomes a mobile office or a mobile bedroom. And of course, one of the benefits is that people who can't drive, for any reason cannot drive, autonomous mobility will provide independent mobility. People with disabilities or for whatever reason can't drive, they don't have a driver's license, will have a lot more opportunities to get around. So from the user's perspective, it's interesting to ask, what will it cost? And as I mentioned, there are a couple different models. There's shared autonomous trips. So it's micro taxis, autonomous micro taxis that pick up multiple passengers, and or there's a personal autonomous vehicle, so you own a vehicle, or there's autonomous taxis where it's just one passenger or one group. And in this graph, I compare the per mile costs of various human-driven or autonomous vehicles. And what you'll see is the shared autonomous vehicles, what you could call a microbus or shared microtransit, would be cheap enough. It would be, realistic projections put it somewhere around 25 cents per passenger mile, which is a little bit more expensive, but in the realm of what it costs you to drive your car, ignoring your fixed costs. So if once you buy a car, your variable costs are somewhere around 50 to 25 cents a mile. And the shared micro transit will be maybe in that realm, where the individual autonomous vehicle taxi, where it's only carrying you. So it drives to your house, picks you up, takes you someplace, and then goes back to its station. That will have to be quite a bit more costly, in part because of all that deadheading, all those zero passenger miles that the vehicle has to make driving to pick you up. And then, and so the shared autonomous taxi, it's much cheaper than a current human-driven taxi, but it's actually going to be quite a bit more costly than what it costs you to drive your car. So once you own a car, the cost is actually quite a bit lower than a future taxis. The real savings is if the autonomous taxis can reduce your need to own your car. That's where you get the real savings. Okay, so the optimists, autonomous vehicle optimists will say that because human error contributes to about 90% of all traffic crashes, autonomous vehicles will reduce crash rates by 90%. Now, I think there are good reasons to be skeptical, because this overlooks some of the new risks that autonomous vehicles will introduce, including hardware and software failures, malicious hacking, increased risk-taking. So, for example, if people thought that the autonomous vehicles on the road are super safe, pedestrians might take greater risks, or human drivers might take greater risks, especially if under some scenarios there'll be dedicated lanes for autonomous vehicles. And so in those lanes, those vehicles will travel at a much higher speed than the general traffic lanes. And so imagine there's a human driver in the general traffic lane, and they're looking at the autonomous lane and they're going maybe 40 miles an hour, and the autonomous traffic lane is going 60 miles an hour. It'll be awfully tempting for a human driver to pull into that autonomous vehicle lane and see if they can keep up with the faster connected vehicles, and that is probably a recipe for a lot of crashes. When those autonomous vehicles do crash, when they're operating in platoons and groups of vehicles driving close together, what would otherwise be a 1 or 2 vehicle crash could become a 10 or 20 vehicle involved crash. And another factor is that the autonomous vehicles might simulate more total driving. And so even if their per kilometer, per mile crash rates are lower, there could be an increase in total crashes due to the induced travel. Let's look at some of the other impacts. Autonomous self-driving cars are still cars, and they still will take up a significant amount of space. So autonomous driving may actually increase traffic congestion by increasing total vehicle travel and by reducing public transit or shared vehicle use. So this is something we're going to be very concerned about, is whether the business model for autonomous vehicles is a lot of people driving, having their own personal autonomous vehicles, driving more total miles and therefore increasing problems like traffic congestion and accidents, or whether autonomous vehicles will be primarily shared and therefore reduce total vehicle travel. Now, many of the projected benefits of autonomous vehicles depend on this idea of platooning. So under a lot of scenarios, you would have your highways would have an autonomous vehicle lane where a large number of vehicles would form platoons, say 5 to 20 vehicles per platoon that would drive within a few feet of each other, which increases fuel efficiency and therefore and reduces traffic congestion. And those are real benefits, but that is going to be costly. You'll have to have special lanes. And so one of the questions is, how soon, what level of autonomous vehicle penetration, market penetration do we need before cities and states devote this very valuable resource called a highway lane to autonomous vehicle use? And what will be some of the unintended consequences when you have platoons of 5 to 20 vehicles driving within a few feet of each other? When there is a crash, is that going to be more severe? And will some people some drivers, human drivers, try and pull into those platoons? So one of the questions that comes up frequently is, to what degree will people own their own autonomous vehicle versus relying on shared vehicles and shared trips? And the truth is, there are many reasons that people, especially wealthy people, would choose to have their own personal vehicle, their own personal autonomous vehicle. It's far more convenient. You have your own vehicle in your driveway. You can leave your let's say your child seat or your golf clubs in the trunk. You can customize it for your personal use. And if you're driving more than about 6,000 annual miles, it's going to be as cheaper to have your own car. Also, autonomous taxis will lack privacy and some of the comfort features. They'll be vulnerable to vandalism or just garbage. And a lot of people are proud of owning their car. There's status involved in identity. So once the novelty wears off, traveling in an autonomous taxi will probably seem, the taxis themselves will have to be hardened with a lot of stainless steel and cheap vinyl to minimize vandalism and cleaning costs. And so it'll be more like traveling in an elevator or economy air than a luxurious car for most autonomous taxi drivers. Autonomous taxis do require, or autonomous vehicles do require a lot of additional equipment. It probably will add somewhere between $1,000 and $3,000 in annualized costs for the additional equipment and the additional maintenance, servicing expenses, and most autonomous vehicle models will require very accurate mapping systems. So you will probably need to subscribe to a very sophisticated mapping system that is constantly updated, and that will probably add a few $100s a year. So in total, the autonomous vehicles will almost certainly be quite a bit more expensive to own and operate than a standard vehicle. So some advocates predict that they could cost less than 20 cents per kilometer, but most of those predictions overlook some of the cost cleaning and the additional cleaning and maintenance at the empty vehicle miles. Electric vehicles appear to be quite a bit cheaper than gasoline-powered vehicles, in part because electric vehicles are not charged a road user fee comparable to the fuel taxes that gasoline or fossil fuel use vehicles are charged. And so one of the questions that comes up is, if we're driving electric vehicles, will motorists be charged an additional road user fee for the roadway costs that they impose? And also for autonomous taxis, there need to be administration and profit costs. So it's very likely that autonomous taxis will actually be a little bit more expensive, or quite a bit more expensive per mile traveled than your current car. And so again, the real savings will occur if your lifestyle allows you to be a low mileage, under 6,000 miles a year, at which point you will save money if you rely on autonomous taxis rather than having your own autonomous vehicle. Yeah, one of the questions, especially from a planning perspective, is, will autonomous technology increase or reduce your total vehicle travel? And in some ways could increase it. It'll be essentially lower time costs, since people can rest or be productive while they're traveling. And you get increased convenience, productivity. You've got also, to the degree that you're, for example, you're having your car drive you to work and then it drives home to save on parking costs, your commuter parking costs. Or if you're relying on shared autonomous taxis, there'll be a lot of empty backhaul miles. Autonomous vehicles can also encourage sprawl development, so people would choose to live farther away from services and their jobs. And so in these ways, autonomous technologies are likely to increase total vehicle travel. On the other hand, it can increase the attractiveness of shared vehicle travel and make self-driving taxi and transit service more attractive. So it could, in these ways, it could reduce total vehicle travel. The overall effect, the net effect there will depend on public policies, to the degree to which our planning decisions and public policies, such as the fees charged for road and parking use and fuel, to the degree that those encourage shared vehicle travel rather than private vehicle travel. So in this table, I compare the various financial costs, convenience, comfort, external costs, and the most appropriate uses of the various autonomous vehicle models. And I don't have time to go into the details. By the way, you can find all of this information on a report that's posted on our website called Autonomous Vehicle Implementation Projections, Implications for Transport Planning. I'll show you the link a little bit later. And so if you're interested in doing these in this kind of a comparison, you can look at it on the table. So in this matrix, or in this table, I compare the benefits and costs to the users and to society, the internal benefits and costs and the external benefits of autonomous vehicles. And again, I don't have time to go to the details of this table, but if you're interested and if you're going to be using this information in a planning context, so you're setting up your own analysis for your own, in a particular jurisdiction or planning context, what I'm suggesting is that you'll want to take into account all of these impacts, take into account the impacts on users and the impacts on society of going from human-driven cars to autonomous cars, and the different ownership or business models. So now we get into thinking about how quickly autonomous vehicles are likely to become common and begin to penetrate, or going to become affordable and available on the new vehicle market, and then the degree that they're going to penetrate the existing vehicle fleet and dominate, at what point they might dominate total vehicle travel. For this analysis, I looked at the time that it took for other previous motor vehicle technologies to penetrate the new vehicle model markets and the vehicle fleets. Now, a typical vehicle lasts somewhere between 10 and 25 years. The current median age of a vehicle is about 16 or 17 years old. And so it does take about 20 or 30 years for when a new vehicle technology becomes common in the new vehicle purchases. It generally takes 20 or 30 years before they dominate the total vehicle fleet because of the years that it takes for fleet turnover. And so this graph that I show here illustrates my predictions of how long it is likely to take if autonomous vehicle technologies become available in the 2020s. So you could go to a vehicle dealer and purchase a fully autonomous level 5 operational car in, let's say, 2025 or 2028. Even then, it's likely to be only available on a relatively high-priced vehicles. Most new vehicle technologies are become first available in the higher-end vehicles. And so, for example, the first automatic transmissions or air conditioning or built-in navigation systems were primarily in the first became available in the luxury vehicle markets, and then they worked their way down to the more general market. And because of that, this projection suggests that even if autonomous technologies become available in the 2020s, it'll take at least through the 2030s before they start becoming common in the new vehicle fleet. And it'll take the 2030s or 2040s before they become common throughout the existing vehicle fleet. So it'll take many years to reach saturation. That's what this suggests. And one interesting way to think of it is asking how long it took for mass vehicle ownership to penetrate the transportation market. At what point, how long did it take before most households owned a private car? Mass automobile production started with the Ford Model T in 1908, but it took half a century before most people that had a driver's license to own a personal car. And it was only that 1980s, so it took almost 7 decades before automobile ownership reached market saturation. So probably this analysis suggests that it will be decades before autonomous vehicles are approaching their market saturation. Now, what will happen as autonomous vehicles become more common? Well, some researchers suggest that we have two possible futures. One is heaven, and you could call it the other is hell. Heaven is we're using autonomous technologies to encourage vehicle sharing, so total vehicle ownership and associated costs go down. Total vehicle travel goes down because people are not just relying on automobiles, they're relying more. Also, it increases walking and bicycling and various forms of public transportation. And so the total costs of our transportation system decline. Hell, the hell scenario is autonomous vehicles are mostly privately owned. We have less support for walking, bicycling, and public transit. There's a large increase in total vehicle travel, and so the costs of vehicle travel increase, including congestion, accidents, pollution, and user costs. So we're gonna look at some ways in just a minute. We're gonna look at some ways that we can encourage heaven and discourage hell for our future. It's also important to put these into the autonomous technologies into perspective. There are a number of other significant trends that are affecting our transportation. Demographic trends, so aging population, more people working at home, changes in consumer preferences, changes in fuel prices, and improvements in travel options, a lot of changes in the way we plan, changes in, and then one of the categories of changes is the development of intelligent transportation, and autonomous vehicles are only one of those. There's also improvements in user information, navigation, payment systems, more electronic pricing. So it's important to keep autonomous vehicles in the autonomous vehicle technology implementation into perspective. It's one of many parts that are occurring. So this matrix looks at how various types of autonomous vehicles will affect various planning objectives and benefits. So level 1 through 4, so your car can operate, can provide some autonomous features under certain circumstances. They can reduce driver stress and they might improve safety, but it requires level 5 before you get independent mobility for non-drivers and significant increases in safety and possible reductions in traffic congestion and parking costs and accidents. And it's when we get shared autonomous vehicles that we start getting additional, some of the additional benefits because of reduced total vehicle travel and shared rides. And now here's the question: what are the benefits if the city does start dedicating special lanes to autonomous vehicles? And that's primarily user savings, benefits to the people that do have the autonomous vehicles who can travel faster and maybe a little bit safer per mile driven. So this type of analysis is going to be important as we look forward and ask how communities should respond to the potentials of autonomous vehicles. A lot of people have been looking, a lot of planners, a lot of professionals have been thinking about this. And one organization called Shared Mobility Principles has developed very specific recommendations for how communities can ensure we get to heaven and not hell as autonomous technologies are implemented. And the real emphasis, the key, is making sure that our policies encourage people to share travel and rely on walking, bicycling, and public transit as much as possible, rather than most households owning a personal autonomous vehicle that stimulates more total travel. So let me start summarizing my conclusions. First is that autonomous vehicles will probably initially be costly and imperfect. Like any new technology, it often takes several generations of the technology to overcome the obstacles. And now, optimists, they look at how quickly it took things like mobile phones and digital cameras and personal computers to transform their markets. And it's true that it only took about a decade from your basic flip phone to be replaced by pretty much most people in developed countries have their own smartphone. And that took about a decade, but a smartphone or a personal computer costs a lot less and lasts a lot fewer years than a typical car. And so again, the turnover, the fleet turnover, the vehicle fleet turnover is much slower than the turnover of mobile phones and personal computers. So it will probably take a lot longer. During the 2020s and 2030s, autonomous vehicles are likely to be expensive novelties with limited abilities. For example, no current technology allows autonomous operation in heavy rain or snow or unpaved roads or some other unmapped roads. So it will probably take many more years before we go from, say, 90% operation, that is 90% of the time you program in a particular destination, your car will drive you there, to 99.5%, where it's almost every time you program in a destination, your car can say, yes, I'll take you there. For the first generation, probably 5 to 10% of the destinations that you could input, it'll say, sorry, I can't go there because of adverse weather, or it's not on our map, or the roads are unpaved. Another factor that could affect this is some people may prefer driving, and so it's a little bit unclear what the saturation levels, the ultimate saturation levels will be. In fact, a lot of the benefits require that all vehicles, at least all vehicles on a particular lane, be autonomous. And so at what point will the governor or the mayor say, sorry, only autonomous vehicles are allowed on this lane or on this road or in this city? So my projections are that it is unlikely that most vehicles will be autonomous before 2050, unless many functional vehicles are intentionally scrapped in order to accelerate deployment of autonomous vehicles. Vehicle innovations tend to be implemented more slowly than other technological change due to high cost, strict safety requirements, and slow fleet turnovers. Let's see. There's considerable uncertainty concerning many of the benefits, costs, and travel impacts. Recent predictions that autonomous vehicles will soon be cheap and ubiquitous, and by 2030 will replace most private vehicle travel, are mostly by people with financial interests in the industry, based on experiences with disruptive telecommunications technologies. And these advocates often exaggerate the net benefits by ignoring some of the new costs and risks and the rebound effects as autonomous vehicle technology stimulates more driving, and the potential harms to people who do not use the technology. So in this graph, I show when various benefits of autonomous vehicles are likely to occur. So let's say you're an affluent person with a visual or mobility impairment, you can't drive. Maybe in the 2020s or 2030s, you'll be able to buy a self-driving car that will provide independent mobility. And probably early on, public transit and freight operators will start using autonomous buses and trucks, and that will reduce their operating costs. But it will probably be the 2040s or 2050s before middle and low income people, that is the people who rely on who purchase vehicles on the used vehicle market, are going to be able to afford autonomous vehicles for frequent use. And it will probably be the 2050s or 2060s before there's enough penetration of these technologies to increase overall safety and reduce traffic congestion and pollution. So what does this mean for planners? Well, you can see in this timeline, I just describe what planners should be doing in various time periods. Right now, in the 2020s, we should be working to develop performance and data collection requirements so we can track the performance as this new technology is developed, and develop large-scale testing to evaluate the benefits and impacts. And in the 2030s and 2040s, we should be studying where autonomous vehicles should be encouraged and how they should be implemented. And if autonomous vehicles prove to be effective and cost-effective and common, we might consider dedicating some highway lanes to their use. But it'll be the 2060s or 2070s before it would really make sense to change a lot of roadway design and start limiting human-driven cars under most circumstances to allow more convenient and efficient autonomous driving. A lot of these benefits are contingent. They depend on how communities and planning decisions affect the infrastructure. So many of them require dedicated vehicle lanes and shifts from personal to shared vehicles. So we can look at how autonomous vehicles are likely to affect some planning issues. they could increase or reduce traffic congestion and pollution depending on whether or not they stimulate more driving. And they could reduce parking and roadway demands. They could reduce traffic accidents and affect mobility for non-drivers. And one particular subject that's going to be important both for increased taxi and ride-hailing or shared vehicles, particularly if autonomous taxis become common, is how we're managing parking and curb parking and curb rights, and whether we're charging electric vehicles for their share of roadway costs, whether we're going to start regulating curb space to favor rapid turnover, pickup and drop-off uses over long-term parking, and if we do have dedicated autonomous vehicle lanes, whether users are going to be charged a premium for driving on those. So the policy recommendations is right now we should be focusing on testing and regulating these new technologies for safety and efficiency, and we should be thinking about how the autonomous vehicles are programmed to emphasize ethical and community goals. We need to think about how we're going to regulate and price roads and curb space in order to favor more efficient vehicle travel, more shared vehicle use. We need, especially in large cities, it's going to be important to support high capacity public transit on major travel corridors. We might autonomous or any shared vehicle, any shift toward shared vehicles and shared autonomous vehicles will allow us to significantly reduce parking requirements and therefore allow more compact and affordable infill development. And we need to think about whether we're going to allow or discourage autonomous vehicles to increase sprawl development. So that is the overview, the quick overview of autonomous vehicle implementation predictions. If you want more information, visit our website, Victoria Transport Policy Institute, vtpi.org, and you'll find the more detailed analysis reports.
Great, thank you, Todd. And just wanted to note.
Now we can go to questions.
Yes, we're going to go to questions. So we did note some slight audio problems while you were speaking, Todd. So I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone or possibly call in on the audio line, which I think the information was sent to you with the link for this. And you can also turn on your webcam,
sure,
and we'll have visual as we move into the Q&A. And as you do that, I'll remind folks that we have received a number of questions and comments from everybody, and you can continue questions. You want us to resend that to you, Todd? Okay. Well, we'll work on that aspect.
Let's see.
While we do that, I'll just remind folks that you can continue.
Let's see.
Okay. Okay. So while you're working on that, I will note that we did notice some audio problems as well. And I will ask you the questions once we get into that part, Todd. So given the audio problems last week, we appreciate you all bearing with us. We have been in contact with the GoToWebinar about that, both last week and during this presentation to determine what the cause of the problems are. We have re-recorded the question and answers that were received last week during our webinar with Patrick Condon, and we will be posting that probably early next week on the smartgrowth.org website. Okay. And I've also got some comments here that others who are using GoToWebinar for other.
Let's see, I think
comments are. You are connected, Todd. Can you hear us?
Okay, so let's see. I'm looking for. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, there is a question whether the slides are going to be
Yes, I
available.
can hear
Yes,
you.
they will be available.
Okay.
Very good.
Todd, I'm going to ask you the questions as we go forward, and you can respond to me if you can hear it. Okay. So can you hear me?
Yes. Very well.
Okay. There appears to be a slight lag here, so we'll try to make that work as we go through the questions and answers. So with that, I will ask you a question.
low density times and locations. So you could, you instead of operating a bus out to, say, on a suburban route where there's low ridership, or late at night where there's low ridership, you might have a self-driving micro bus or a taxi. But in dense urban areas, it'll be even more important to favor the shared vehicles, things like buses and trains, because they are so space efficient. They require a small fraction of the amount of space that's required per passenger mile. And so I think people working in the transit industry should put together arguments to respond to those who claim, without really having thought through this, that we can abandon conventional public transportation and shift entirely to self-driving taxis in the foreseeable future. At best, it'll serve some of the functions of public transportation after, let's say, 2030, when the technology is fully developed. But for most of our careers, I think the changes will be modest. And I think it will be very important for transit professionals or transportation professionals, especially those involved in public transportation planning, to be really effective at showing, at communicating the full benefits provided by public transportation, and therefore why communities should continue to support public transportation, even as some of these new technologies fill some of the niches or satisfy some of the needs that are served by conventional public transportation. So I think there'll be changes, but it's not going to be simple and it's not going to be fast. And we need to continue. We will need to defend public transportation for the next decade or two until we know how this technology can really operate.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Next question is, how can we prevent autonomous vehicles from further dividing our communities socially, physically, and economically?
Right, that is a great question. And it comes back to pretty much the same answer as I described before. One way to think of it is that for the foreseeable future, let's say that during the 2020s, even under optimistic projections, autonomous technology will only be available on the most expensive, on relatively expensive new vehicles. They will be available on Mercedes-Benzes and Lexus, but probably not on your standard Chevrolet or Ford. Simply because they're going to cost a lot extra, so they'll be considered a premium product. So for the foreseeable future, for the next decade or more, autonomous technology will benefit wealthy people, and only to the degree that we can apply this technology to favor shared vehicles, shared taxis and autonomous bus service, and therefore improve the affordability and availability of taxi and public transit services. Only under those circumstances are we helping low-income households, low-income people take advantage of this technology. So I do think it will be important to manage roads and price technologies and design public transit so that the technology is used to improve shared transportation and not to compromise it.
Okay. Here's a comment, and I think there's a question kind of embedded in it, but maybe you can respond to it. Seems to me like shared autonomous vehicles could make more room for bus lanes and make public transit more desirable and feasible.
Absolutely. So the potential is there. First of all, it could significantly reduce the cost of providing public transit. So we could have lots more public transit. Instead of, let's say, one 50-foot bus every hour, a route could have 3 or 4 minibuses every 15 or 20 minutes, and at the same cost, for the same operating cost. And so you have more frequent service, which is a huge gain. We could have autonomous taxis, could be quite a bit cheaper. And for many trips, a taxi is really a sensible option, you know, for maybe not for everyday use necessarily, but for, you know, if somebody needs if somebody who can't drive needs to take a few trips a week, autonomous taxi could make that more affordable. And if we price roads efficiently, we apply decongestion pricing and HOV lanes, it could make the shared vehicles much more attractive to most travelers, most peak period travelers, and therefore free up road space for those facilities. So if we're smart, if let's say a community, a city is smart and does everything they can to favor the shift away from most people driving alone in their personal car to more shared vehicle travel and more reliance on walking and bicycling for local errands, then everybody wins. Even if you are one of those people that has your own self-driving car and you're going to use it, you're going to commute to work, you're going to have your electronic chauffeur drive you to work every day. Even if that's true, you're better off if all your neighbors are relying more on walking and bicycling and shared vehicles. So it's potentially win-win. But the real key is to be strong, to have these strong policies that would motivate somebody who could afford their own personal car, driving their own personal car, to actually use the shared vehicle option. And that an increasing portion of households would shed cars. They would go from owning multiple cars to just one car or become car free. And then we're freeing up huge resources in terms of road space and parking space and the capital costs of those vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. Does the term autonomous vehicle refer principally to a vehicle without a driver? And if so, doesn't it include a bus provided by public transit that needs no one to drive it?
Right. So there's actually tremendous potential for autonomous bus and autonomous freight vehicles, because those vehicles have a paid operator. So somebody who's being paid, you know, the total cost, including their wages and benefits, a typical driver is going to cost somewhere between $50 and $100 per hour of operation. So if we off-street parking spaces per vehicle. And if you total those up, the value of those parking spaces, it's easily worth more than the car. So that every time somebody spends $1 buying a car, they're expecting somebody else to pay more than $1 to provide parking for that car. And that's actually coded, that's actually embedded in our zoning code. So those are government mandated parking spaces. Okay, so on average, let's say in the United States, all levels of government spend about $800 a year per capita on roads, and governments mandate somewhere around $2,000 to $4,000 a year worth of parking, depending on location and depending on the zoning codes and what your estimated cost per parking space. But there are huge potential benefits, and one of the potential benefits is if we can reduce, if autonomous shared vehicles allow us to cut the number of off-street parking spaces in half, or reduce it by, let's say, 75%, we have just freed up a huge amount of urban land that can now be used for infill development. And so we can actually make, and we can be reducing total traffic and accident risk to pedestrians and bicyclists, and in other ways, making urban environments more attractive. If, for example, we program autonomous vehicles specifically to go slow and to be very cautious around pedestrians and bicyclists, then most of them become electric powered, we could have a much nicer urban environment, much more urban land available for housing and commercial development, and our cities could be overall much more efficient, cost efficient, and attractive. Okay, that's great. That's heaven. And autonomous technologies have a role to play in creating those more attractive cities, more attractive urban neighborhoods. On the other hand, if we simply allow wealthy people to buy self-driving cars and use those with no policies that favor shared travel, then we're going to have more total traffic. The projections suggest that total vehicle travel could increase by 10 to 30% simply because it's so much easier to travel long distance, and you have all that empty backhauling. And so our cities could become more congested and more dangerous for pedestrians and bicyclists and more polluted, and we would need equal or more parking spaces. It's up to us, or I should say, it's up to policymakers to decide how we're going to use these technologies at a community level.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Here's a question. This is a very good high-level view of the challenges. Are you aware of especially good detailed evidence-based research on the challenges? Let me give one example. We hear AV can provide mobility for people as they age out of driving, but older people would seem to be less likely to embrace new technologies and new ways of doing things. And the factors that make driving harder also make getting in and out of vehicles harder, such as navigating curbs, etc.
Right, that's the good question. And for those, because I'm talking with my peers, my colleagues, let me assure you, this is a really exciting area of research. And if you're a planner, if you become the first autonomous vehicle planning specialist in your community, you're going to have job security, because these questions are going to pop up a lot. And they're autonomous technologies introduce some new risks, and at least so far have been pretty bad at being able to identify a pedestrian or a bicyclist and predict their movement. The problem is there's so much variation, and so every time we think every time technologists think they've been able to categorize pedestrian behavior, suddenly some new variation pops up. Let me give you an example. There's probably going to need to be special program modules for each type of wild animal. It turns out, for those of you in Australia, kangaroos are particularly difficult. Their kangaroo behavior is particularly difficult to predict. So very likely, autonomous vehicles will need to have special programs, special components of their analysis programs to account for kangaroos. But think about Halloween. What if some children dress up as kangaroos? Will your self-driving car be able to predict the behavior of, let's say, a 6-year-old who's dressed up as a kangaroo, or a bunch of teenagers who are dressed up as kangaroos and zebras and giraffes? Or what if there's a zombie walk and some of the people dressed up as zombies have kangaroo masks on? Now if you were driving around on Halloween or the night of a zombie walk, and I warned you, oh, watch out for the zombie walk because there are a bunch of young people dressed up as zombie vampires or zombie zombie kangaroos, you would probably understand what I'm talking about because you've one time been a foolish young person. But if you try to program zombie kangaroos zombie walk kangaroos into self-driving car software, it might be confused. So those are the kind of complications that the analysts are going to have to take into account. There are countless variations on everything that you try and program. So those of us involved in the planning side, we're not the technologists that are programming this. We're interested in how these new technologies are going to affect vehicle travel and vehicle safety and traffic safety and consumer costs and parking demands and roadway demands. We're going to be looking skeptically at these optimistic predictions.
Interesting points there, for sure. Next question. Given the current ways to pay for transportation systems through fuel taxes, how might a shift toward electric autonomous vehicles pay for the long-term transportation maintenance and improvement costs?
Right, that's a very important issue. On one hand, we think that it's fair, what you would call horizontal equity, that the people using a road should pay for that road. So traditionally we used fuel taxes, and even though it's not a perfect pricing instrument, it's better than none. You know, it's a reasonable circuit. Electric vehicles aren't charged that fee, and so there's essentially somewhere around a 5 cent per mile subsidy to electric vehicles, in that they're not paying their fair share of roadway user fees. The truth is, neither are gasoline. Most currently in the U.S., only half of roadway costs are recovered through user fees. Half of the cost of the roads, and virtually almost all of the costs of your local roads, are funded through general taxes that everybody pays. But at least the major highways are funded primarily through fuel taxes. And we think that that's fair. Electric vehicles are exempt. And so regardless of whether it's a self-driving or a human-driven electric vehicles, this is a good time to rethink about the fairness of exempting them. We're essentially giving them an electric vehicle driver is gaining $400 or $500 a year in roadway subsidies that their neighbor who owns a gasoline-powered car is paying. So you could say electric vehicles provide enough emission reduction benefits that we are willing to subsidize them. But I think it's time to have sort of a discussion of what the long-term fairness, the fair funding should be as non-gasoline vehicles, particularly electric vehicles, become more common. And some jurisdictions are going to either a flat VMT fee or what economists love is a location and a time and location based fee that allows a higher fee to be charged under congested conditions. We call it a decongestion pricing. And that makes a lot of sense. Every economist, almost every economist in the world supports what you would call time and location or decongestion road pricing. Unfortunately, the economists represent a very small portion of citizens. And so usually when we introduce some sort of efficient road pricing, the general public, well, some interest groups frame it as harmful especially to low-income people. That's actually not true, because compared with any other road funding, some sort of user fee is actually better for low-income people are paying the other taxes, the general taxes that pay for roads. So low-income people are actually better off with some sort of a road user fee, but it does face very significant political opposition. And so it'll be up to us, that is the transportation policy and planning professionals, to build a case that for fairness sake and to prevent ride hailing, that is Uber and Lyft, and in the future autonomous taxis, from increasing traffic congestion problems and increasing accidents and increasing air pollution, that we need more rational roadway user charges, preferably something that does have a higher fee for driving under congested conditions, and therefore an incentive for more people to shift from personal cars to shared cars or shared vehicles. So this is part of the essential package to favor more efficient shared vehicle travel is more efficient road pricing.
Great, thanks, Todd. Before we started, we noted that in the webinar format, unfortunately, you can't hear the audience chuckle. And we did get a wry comment from one of the members listening today about zombie kangaroos that I won't mention today. But anyway, people are paying attention. Next question is, what do you think is the business case that will drive AV adoption in rural areas?
Right, well, it's what you would call travel time savings. So think of it this way. The cost per minute, or per hour, the dollars per hour, or the cents per minute that a traveler would assign to their vehicle travel or travel activity varies a lot. If you are, and there's a lot of research on this, some of which is I've worked on. You'll find analysis of travel time costs on our website. If you under pleasant conditions, travel time has a very low cost. Under unpleasant or stressful conditions, the same amount of time has a much higher cost. So if you knew that your car could drive you, you might very likely accept a much longer commute instead of shopping for a house that's only near your work site, say within a 10 to 25 minute commute of your work site. You might accept an hour daily commute on the assumption that you're just going to snooze or play with video games or get some work done on that hour commute. Okay, in rural areas, that travel time can be particularly long. It is common for rural people, especially let's say somebody that lives in a rural area and gets a job in another community. It's quite common that they will have a 40, 50, 60 mile commute to their work site. So rural areas often have a lot of potential driving. Autonomous vehicles can make that very attractive, especially if they're electric autonomous vehicles that are exempt from road user taxes. And so in rural areas, it's possible we will see quite significant increases in total vehicle travel. Now, it's also possible autonomous technology would allow more rural vehicles to shed cars, to go from owning 2 cars to 1 car, or give up cars altogether and rely on shared autonomous vehicles. So depending on public policies and depending on some of the details of the technology, rural areas could see a large increase in total transportation costs or large reductions. Does that answer? Do you think that answers the question?
I think so. Obviously, there's a lot
less contagion than if they were all to travel 2 passengers in 500 Uber cars, or a single passenger in their friend or family member's car. So 1,000 cars are each traveling with one non-driver passenger. It's not clear to me that public transportation is actually a higher risk than the other forms of shared vehicles. If a taxi or Uber driver in a confined car is probably exposed to at least as much risk as a bus driver in a bus. So I think there will be need to be great concern about the actual infection rate of different forms of transportation, or infection risks of different forms of transportation. But I would not focus on public transportation as having a particularly high risk. One of the implications, if we want to minimize contagion, that is the spread of infectious diseases, walking and bicycling, creating more walkable and bikeable communities is certainly a priority. And so to the degree that autonomous technologies can help do that is probably a good thing overall. One of the interesting findings from the experience in New York, in the New York region, is that contagion rate, or COVID infection rates and deaths rates per capita are actually much higher in the automobile dependent areas than in the more compact transit oriented areas like Manhattan, which suggests that public transit is not nearly the risk factor as a lot of people assume, and that that reducing car use is an important component of reducing contagion.
Great. Okay, one last question here. When people see your time frame, they might go back to sleep on what you say is critical now, policy development. Any suggestions on how to engage folks now, like some very specific to-dos?
Right. Well, in a sense, this is really not a discussion just about autonomous vehicles. It's really a discussion about individual or passengers in a low volume vehicle, that is somebody driving alone or with one passenger in a car, versus space efficient shared vehicles. And so the starting point, I think, for any community for any planning process, is to really think about what kind of future your community wants. Does it want a community that is more walkable and bikeable and affordable and healthy and resource efficient? Or does it want a more increased total vehicle traffic, more spending on roads and parking, more expensive higher total transportation costs for users and communities, more sprawl development? So once you discuss that, then autonomous vehicle technologies and the implications of autonomous vehicles is recognized as one of the factors that's going to occur over the next few years. Other ones could include increased health and environmental concerns, increased concerns about affordability. There are a number of aging population, and therefore the need to accommodate non-drivers. I mean, one interesting little component of this is that traffic. One of the things we know is that when people when drivers are more than about 70 or 75 years of age, they become their driving ability tends to decline rapidly. And so there's a pretty good case for safety's sake to have special driver testing and restrictions on older drivers, people 70 or 75 years old. Okay, And then at some point, some of those we're going to say you're not a safe driver. We need to eliminate your licensing. We're going to take away your driver's license. Okay, so a lot of traffic safety strategies are based on the assumption that we can reduce special high-risk driving. Traffic safety professionals have an obligation to ensure that every time we say to, let's say, a teenager, or that we're going to have special driver testing, or to people who are going out drinking, that we're going to forbid you from drinking and driving, or for seniors, we're going to have special driver testing. We always have an obligation to say, you can't drive, therefore, here's how you're going to be able to get around. And so autonomous technologies, autonomous taxis and public transit do provide an opportunity to prepare for our future self. Our future self may want to go out for a drink, or our future self may want to continue to get around and visit and have some independent mobility, even if our driving skills decline when we're 70 or 75. So there are lots of good reasons that we should be thinking about more space efficient, resource efficient, affordable transportation options, and that we should be thinking about improving independent mobility for non-drivers, partly in preparation for our senior selves. We should be thinking about that, and then autonomous technologies play a role. But the starting point is to be really thinking about what we want, what we need to do to prepare our community for future travel demands and future housing demands. Does that help?
I think so. I think so. So we didn't get to all the questions, but your contact information is on the screen right now, both the Victoria Policy Institute's website and your email, so folks can follow up with you directly. Any final thoughts for us today?
Well, the future is coming at us one way or another. So it's up, and there are a lot of people who are looking at one facet of the changes that are occurring, but overlook others. Our challenge as practitioners, as professional planners, is to ensure that the analysis that's done is comprehensive, and so we're able to guide our communities toward heaven. So I want to thank you all for participating. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my research, and I'm looking forward to reviewing. If anybody has any questions, send me the email, and maybe we'll have some future webinars on other subjects. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Todd, and thank you everybody participating today. This will conclude our webinar, Autonomous Vehicle Implementation, Implications for Transportation Planning. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to Todd for a great presentation, everybody in the audience, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology expert who helps to make all this happen behind the scenes. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org in the coming days. Also, for those